All right, we're back. It's Brigadoon Radio. Joining us today, as always, is Gerald Ashley. Gerald, where are we finding you?
I'm still in Surrey, and it's blowing a gale.
I love it. And for people in the States, that means it's raining and windy, right?
Yeah, exactly. We don't get tornadoes. We don't get anything really. So when the wind blows a little bit, it seems like a storm.
Tornadoes. That's a good side story. Joining us today is also wonderful Blonde Money, Helen Thomas. Helen, how are you doing? Thanks for joining us.
I'm very good, thank you. Thanks for inviting me onto the show. Lovely to see you both.
Where are we finding you?
I'm actually in a new home. It's new to me. In Oxford, deepest darkest Oxford, which is actually where I originally grew up. I'm afraid to say it was my local university, and I did study here. But it's good to be back. Get out of London. I've actually got a back garden, and I can see trees that are blowing in the wind. So I can confirm that it's blowing a gale, as Gerald.
I love it. All right. So our first topic, we're going to talk about the French election. France votes this Saturday. Who wants to start out? I think we need to explain how the French election works in all its glory. Does anybody want to dive into that?
Yeah, well, I'll avoid it other than picking up the ball to pass it to Helen. But just one sort of side remark that may colour things. I think it does tend to favour the current incumbent for a variety of reasons. But let's get Helen to put some colour on things.
But Helen, can you talk about the process? Because I think there's 12 candidates actually on the ballot, and it's over 2 weekends.
That's right. So the French system, they always have these 2 rounds to the voting. So because of course what they want to get you to is a trade-off in that last round. You just get 2 choices with the idea that should give the winner, will have more than 50%, strong government, la vive la française, etc., etc. So basically this first round is whittling it down. Who are going to be those 2 names on the ballot paper, which then is 2 weeks later, everyone gets to choose between those 2 people.
Can if somebody gets 50% plus 1 or 51% this Saturday, April 10th, is that person declared the winner, or is it more like is it always a runoff?
No, they are. It's just very rarely. I'm trying to remember if that's actually ever happened, but I should know that. You're testing me already, but
No.
I don't think so. I mean, the idea is a voting system designed to try and give a mandate to the winner. But I should say, and we'll probably get into this. Yes, there are choices, but you could always spoil your ballot paper or write somebody else's name, or you can actually do what they call a blanc vote, a white vote. That's me trying to say French for white. So like nothing. You can just say I don't want either of these people. So
wow.
Yeah, you could. So yes, you'll get over 50%, but you may not get 50% of ballots cast, because of course if there's a lot of people that spoil their ballot paper or have a blank vote, then technically you might not have gotten 50% plus 1 of the actual votes. And I actually mention that because I think that is going to be relevant in this particular election. So,
and this system, I believe, has only been around since World War II. It's like a 80, 70-year institution, right?
Mm-hmm.
This voting process, is that correct?
Well, yes and no. There was the Fourth Republic from 1946 till 1958, 59. And then de Gaulle got worried because there were so many competing interests. And so the Fifth Republic started, and that's why we've got this kind of runoff system. I mean, one observation I'd quickly make is that you always end up with everybody's second best choice. Okay, as Helen says, you do end up with somebody who's won outright in the second election. But she'll run through the numbers, I'm sure, in a minute. When you look at the candidates in the first round, they're it's much closer, and then it goes to this winner takes all idea.
How strong is the president relative to, say, the prime minister in the UK or the president in the United States? I mean, how important is this job in France in terms of the political structure? Is it the most powerful job? Is it the second most powerful job? Is it?
No, it's extremely powerful and can be one of the most powerful heads of state, even stronger than the US president, would you believe? Well, you would believe that, I know, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners would as well, because, of course, the separation of powers, there's natural constraints built into the American system. Whereas in France, as we were just hearing from Gerald, there have been changes over the years to centralize and cement power. It's almost a kind of quasi-monarchical idea now around the presidency. However, although the president has a lot of powers, there is a prime minister position, and there's legislative elections that take place later on for who becomes the prime minister. Now, if they're from the same party as the president is extremely powerful. If they're from a different party, then it can get a lot more difficult, a bit more like the classic American style, Democrat in the White House, Republicans in Congress. But I would emphasize that it is the instrumental role in the French state is the presidency.
Well, that's enough civics. Let's get into the more interesting part. What really matters, the politics of this. So we got 12 candidates. It seems to be that there's probably 3 or 4 that really matter. I should say in 2017, I was in Paris before the election, and I'd really never paid any attention to the French election. But being there before that election in 2017, I get really fascinated. I find Macron super interesting, super fascinating. The fact that he started his own party, I find really interesting. His whole story is pretty wild. And just studying it. So I've probably paid more attention to any outside election outside the UK. It's just been a new experience to me. So it's been really interesting and fun to watch. But let's break down the politics of it. As the polls seem now, it seems like we're headed to a Macron-Le Pen runoff. But Le Pen is surging, or is this all just, to sell papers, or what is really happening on the ground? Who has a good insight on that?
Gerald, do you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I would say if I was a betting man, I think Macron wins because for the simple reason, depending where you are on the spectrum, he's the least worst of the final 2. There's always been this sort of anybody but Le Pen type vote that seems to come out in the second round. We have to go back quite a way to see any serious attack from the far left. So we're really talking about the far right. So the kind of sort of generalist view is it's Macron versus Le Pen, and it might be close, but it's how you define close. I mean, we're talking about maybe 53-47, something like that. Bear in mind, the best win in the United States since the Second World War was Reagan with 54-46. So, when we talk about sweeping wins, things are often a little closer. Small note here to the Scottish nationalists who get very excited at 45. 45 ain't 51.
It is looking like Macron, Le Pen in the final round. And then, as we said, then you have all those people that voted for pretty much anyone on the left, whether they're even just centre left or far left, almost communist votes. Who do they hold their nose and vote for if they vote? Or, as I say, do they spoil their ballot paper? Which is where you get potentially strange results, and where, this concept of left-right is more of a circle than a line. Do the extreme left meet the extreme right? And certainly there is a bit of overlap in Le Pen's policies and this, the most sort of left wing, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who obviously you've read about, Marc. So I think it is better to characterise the current political debate. So over the last decade, in fact, more than that, since the financial crisis, as establishment versus anti-establishment.
Yeah.
Smartest thing that Macron ever did was create a whole new party and portray himself as a completely new breath of fresh air, despite
and Marche.
Yeah, despite the fact that he actually worked in the previous discredited left-wing government as the economy minister, despite the fact he had one of those lovely privileged French upbringings and went to one of the great special grande école fancy schools, etc. But he was an insurgent, and I hesitate to say this, but it's true. He's an insurgent like Trump, like Nigel Farage, like Boris Johnson. People who've come from the establishment but managed to portray themselves as outside it. So that's where it's that was where he was a challenge for Le Pen, because she had always been the anti-establishment figure. So but where we're at now with this particular round, and why we're loving it. I can tell we're all super interested in it, but I get the sense people wonder why. People probably wonder why we're even talking about it. They're known quantities. We know Macron and Le Pen. I mean, the name Le Pen has been around for 30 odd years, because obviously her father started the party initially before she distanced herself from him. So there is a clear discontent that's been around since the financial crisis. Obviously, it's grown in the weight of the economic problems currently being faced with inflation, etc. So who do you go for if you're fed up with the establishment? And that, for me, is a slight wild card about predicting this final round. Which is why I think, by the way, that the spoilt ballots, none of the above, might do quite well. They're not going to win, by the way. It just means whoever wins isn't going to have the mandate they would like to have, because they're not going to actually win more than 50% of voters.
Go ahead, Gerald.
Yeah, I think all of that, agree with all of that. We're going to be in violent agreement today, which is always disappointing.
Not good, is it? Not good.
But it's interesting to note Madame Le Pen's manoeuvres. She's no longer talking about leaving the euro, and she's much more soft pedaling on Brussels and her characterization of interference in the French government. So in a way, she's become much more an establishment story, I suppose. Whether that's the reason that she's gaining, I think a lot of what may be happening to Macron is first of all, he's only held one rally. He's got a rather sort of Napoleonic view of all of this. It's all very tedious that he has to be re-elected. In fact, there was one press announcement that he said he didn't have time for electioneering. There were more serious matters, ergo the Ukraine. But equally, his performance with Mr. Putin, I don't think is doing him any good. And
do you not, Gerald? Ooh.
No, I don't. Yeah, I know. There you go. I
might disagree there. Go on.
At last. I mean, I think he's basically exploiting the French 6-month position ahead of the EU and wants to get the jump on Germany. And
agree with you on that.
Ukraine is not going to be Finland. I personally don't think it's too easy a solution. And he spent a fair amount of time talking to Mr. Putin on the phone every day, which I would have thought after a while must be a painful experience.
So I mean, I would say that he's doing quite a smart thing. Boris Johnson's doing something similar in the UK, which is when you're the one in power as the statesman at a time when you have to represent your country.
Yeah.
In statecraft, you look like the president. You are. I mean, you're doing the job. And then that makes it a little bit harder, I think, if you're a French voter. Now, can you imagine Marine Le Pen taking that role? It's a bit harder because she's never done it. And I just think it creates that incumbency bias.
Yeah,
Now, whether he's doing it well or not,
yeah, no, I get that. I get that. I mean, I think a couple of factors that maybe nobody here is close enough to the French public, but there's just the horse that, the dog that didn't bark in the night, get my animal right, which is the Gilets jaunes. I mean, where have they gone to? I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, it was all, pitchforks and anger on the streets, and they seem to have completely melted away. But you would say that maybe the political and financial situation is no better, if not worse.
Oh, it's worse.
And so that's remarkable in itself. But so, my €5 is still on Monsieur Macron.
So do we see, is there any chance of consolidation on the left or right? And do we see Macron finishing at the top of the first round here, or do we have a surprise in the offing?
I think there could be a surprise. I think there could definitely be a surprise this weekend, partly because the polls have been rather up and down. There have been candidates that have had momentum and it's fading away. It's sort of a bit of a freebie this round to register your discontent, picking up on Gerald's point there about the Gilets jaunes and how people are even more fed up these days with a variety of other issues. So, I could see a situation. I could kind of see a situation where nobody's in a strong position after the second round, because Macron might do a little bit worse, Le Pen might do a little bit better, but the others will also pick up points, if you see what I mean. And so you end up with this kind of, obviously it'll go down to the top two, and I do still believe it'll be Macron and Le Pen, but it will be hard for them to say, oh yeah, that lot, they're coming my way. Because I think everyone's just gonna be like, I'm angry about this. No, I'm angry about that. No, you screwed up the pandemic. No, you screwed up inflation. No, I've lost my job. Oh my God. Actually, unemployment's not doing too badly, to be fair to Macron. So I actually think it's going to be a bit of a mess after Sunday. And then what matters is what always matters in politics: momentum. Who has got the momentum? And that is where Le Pen does have a little bit of the edge. If the polls are picking up correctly, she's getting that wind at the right moment, that tailwind to push her up. Whereas Macron did quite well, but he's plateauing now.
Yeah.
What struck me as well compared to the last election is, I think you're right in saying there's been no television debates this time, and Monsieur Macron made mincemeat of Madame Le Pen in the final television debate last time. I mean, she was all over the place, referring to notes, getting facts wrong, all the rest of it, which is anybody, I've never been it, but I can imagine anybody who's been a political candidate recognises this because of the sheer grind of a campaign. One other factor to chuck in, and I don't know if either of you two know the answer, I don't, is there a term limit on how many times Macron can run? Or could he go a third term?
I thought I should check, actually, because I thought it changed after de Gaulle, and we should know, shouldn't we? You have to edit that out, Marc. You can't leave that in.
Yeah, actually, I don't know. We're going to have to go to...
there used to be 7
Google.
years.
Well, it used to be a longer term. You're right, Gerald.
Yeah.
It used to be 7, and now it's 5.
I have a feeling there may be a term limit, but I don't hold me to it, as I say, whilst... my distinguished colleague here is busy Googling away. He may come up with the answer.
A maximum of 2. Here it goes. In 2008, constitutional reform, only 2 consecutive terms.
Okay.
So I suppose you could run again, but there we go. There are term limits.
Quite young. He'd be quite young, wouldn't he? Even at the end of another 5 years.
I know. What is Macron going to do if he loses? I mean, he's going to end up at Oxford or Stanford or back to McKinsey, maybe.
Oh, he'll run in 5 years' time. He'll run in.
He'd run in. You're right. He would run in 5 years' time. But we should mention Eric Zemmour, by the way, who actually, more than anyone, I believe, is instrumental in Le Pen now surging, because he was so extreme. He outflanked her, both in his provocativeness and his rhetoric and his genuine policy, actually, on particularly, of course, on immigration. Whereas Gerald, as you said, Le Pen has softened herself a bit and rode back on the anti-Brussels stuff and the anti-Euro. Zemmour just bowled straight in there with some extremely strong views on not just immigration, but many other topics. But what is interesting about him is, again, how his support has just dripped away. I mean, October, November, I was thinking, if he can build on this, we're going into Macron versus Zemmour as the final round. And I would have been extremely confident Macron would win that, just because Zemmour is so much of a provocateur. I mean, he just loves himself so much. Oh, go on, Marc.
No, this is will be our segue to our next topic. I think Zemmour, I have no idea, but there's stalking candidates in the U.S., primaries where candidates run to create chaos and problems in the primary, and you just wonder if Zemmour was not there to make Le Pen look more reasonable, but I don't know. It seems a bit convenient.
that would be a hell of a deal, but it certainly has worked out in. I heard when somebody talk about it, normalizes Le Pen. It makes her look a bit of a safer choice. Initially there was this.
Yeah, because it never seemed like Zemmour. It seemed like he got a lot of attention, a lot of energy, but never really had like a proper campaign to kind of harness the voters. That's just my perspective from the outside. But whereas Le Pen has an established party and has been doing it for years. And,
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we all know that Eric Zemmour is all about Eric Zemmour, right? So
yeah.
I think he's, I'm sure, delighted with his own levels of national exposure. Go on,
if you like conspiracy theories, of course, Madame Le Pen has borrowed quite a lot of money from Russian banks. Perhaps she wouldn't have to repay it now, wouldn't be able to repay it. But there you are. There's a small brick to drop in the pond, maybe.
Well, that's a good transition to.
You're right to go on.
No, Helen, go ahead.
No, but you're right. You are right to mention the Russia element to this, because where I just said Macron at least has been a statesman dealing on the world stage with the Russian leader. Of course, Le Pen had to famously shred like 1 million campaign leaflets because it had a picture of her shaking Putin's hand, right? So when you're being asked, can you imagine this woman leading our country as we are having effectively a global economic war? Is that going to put some people off? I think it probably will. I just think it will. But Mark, what's your next topic?
Well, we're going to talk about PSYOPs, disinformation, all that fun stuff. And what's interesting is, that piece of collateral, we'll put that in the show notes, image of that. The Russian use of disinformation and being in the right place at the right time, unbelievable. I would joke all the time here in the States. I mean, the Russians have been doing diplomacy for, 500-600 years, and they seem quite skilled at it and been doing it for a long time, whereas certainly here in the States, we're very new to it. But what do we think about disinformation, PSYOPs, all this good stuff? A lot of convenient information. We're both exposed to an endless amount of information now in real time, which is pretty wild. And Zelensky, beaming into parliaments all over the world every day, speaking to the UN yesterday, at the Grammys this weekend out in Las Vegas. What a time to be alive. So, Gerald, what are your thoughts on PSYOPs? Are you for or against PSYOPs?
Well, they're there whether you like them or not, basically. Though I think it does play nicely to Helen's point about establishment versus anti-establishment. We do, I sense, have a very distrusting audience for all sorts of media these days. And of course, there are many more channels, not like this one, where all sorts of wacko stuff can be promoted. And so there's always been the Green Ink Brigade, and they did just write bizarre letters to their MP. Now they jump on Twitter, they run TikTok videos, they're all over the place in every shape and form. Plus, I do think that mainstream media has lost some trust the general public. And I don't mean people with extreme political views. I mean people who are quite sort of mild and meek in many ways, but they look twice now at stuff in newspapers, and they're less trusting of broadcast media as well. And I think the mainstream media have got themselves to blame for that, because a lot of them have got sucked into this idea of becoming campaigners rather than purveyors of news. And this is very fertile ground for the Russians. And the final point, one of the interesting things is I don't think the Russians are doing that well. They've been a little bit sort of coarse and crude in their stuff, unless there's something deep going on that we haven't realized. But I don't think Putin can congratulate himself much on anything other than trying to bully the domestic public into his point of view and shutting down any opposition.
Well, I think it depends where you're sitting, actually. There's been some, so there's good and bad to the technological revolution, because bad in that it can, the trolling bot farms can target anyone, anywhere with whatever they want to push out there. But I did see a very interesting company who have tracked the sentiment of Russian tweets in certain countries. And it's certainly the case that they have focused some of their disinformation campaigns in certain countries. So, Gerald, you're saying, oh, it doesn't feel like they're doing very well or they've not done a very good job. But if you were sitting in Turkey or India or parts of Africa, apparently you might have quite a different opinion.
Yeah, fair enough.
Now, that said, I like to take a very long-term view on all of this and say, look, just remember when they translated the Bible into English, right? So at that point, you then had your priests telling you the story and the truth, and come to me, and I will pardon you, and I am the one true Lord. And then you have Martin Luther says, have a personal relationship with God. Read it for yourself. And the printing press then promulgates the word, and I mean, basically, we end up with 2 centuries of war over this. So, the dissemination of different points of view has been around for a hell of a long time. And I hear what you're saying, Mark, right? Like the Russians have been very good for several centuries. I think everyone's done a good job on the propaganda when they needed to. But I am willing to admit that what is different now is our relationship with consuming that news, and this point about trust, because I think there is because we literally hold it in our hands. Like my phone tells me on Facebook what my mates think about this, and there's the trust psychology to that maybe is a bit different from a pamphlet arriving through your post in the 17th century. So, and it of course can be done much quicker, and there's all this stuff about social media and the thing it fires off in your brain, your serotonin, dopamine levels, blah blah blah. So, but all I would say is disinformation is not new, and I don't think we can claim anybody is winning on this particular campaign, either side, just yet. Would be my take.
Well, and part of disinformation isn't really winning; it's just really creating chaos, right? Like I think the Russians, getting back to them, famously, if you believe, what the U.S. intelligence services said about the 2016 election, they would put out every possible viewpoint and every possible issue just to create chaos and stir it up, which I think is also part of the disinformation layered upon the algorithms that are really shaping how we're receiving our news on any given day. It's quite an interesting stew, plus our own psychology. I don't know. It's interesting. I do agree with what you said, Helen, too, about the Russian disinformation. It seems like they're probably maybe doing really well at home. The launch of the Z, which is interesting. Nobody really knows what the hell that's all about. Or at least nobody's figured it out in the West. As a consumer, as a user, and a believer in news, I don't know. I find it endlessly fascinating and quite a joy. What do you guys think about Elon Musk buying nearly 10% of the Twitter machine? What do we think about this? Are we excited? Are we scared?
This is the really top story, and the top story is the edit button, so that you can edit when you mistype or typo. The problem with that, of course.
Hold on, I need to tell you about the edit button. So there's rumors like should you have the edit button? I've heard both sides. I think no, and technically it's super hard to an edit button for the Twitter machine.
Well, you kind of shot my fox, because what I was going to say was that the problem is we shall go hurriedly back, re-editing everything for changing our views and everything. So
there you go, exactly. So how does that?
So I think on balance, it's no. It's an inconvenience when you put a typo in, but in a way, it adds a certain veracity that if people can't go back and rejig everything. Funnily enough, if they put it in, I think Twitter could fade quite a lot, because we'd be, this would sow yet more distrust and suspicion about, well, did he really say this? I mean, I would say I've only ever sent the most perfect, wonderful, and insightful tweets.
Well, so
it won't be a problem.
So are we excited about Elon coming on board? Like, what does this portend? I mean, is he going to start selling us cars and solar panels via Twitter, or do we think this is good? Is it a good investment? Is it a vote of confidence for the Twitter platform as a news site?
I think so, but it is a bit odd. I was quite surprised when I heard about it. I mean, to be honest with you, I love Twitter. Gerald knows that. You know that, Marc. We all
No, it's the best.
interact.
That's how I met you guys. So it's obviously a wonderful tool.
Exactly. And I'm with Gerald on. I mean, the edit thing, I think, is not a good addition. I mean, basically, it is like walking into a pub at 10 o'clock one Friday night, and your mates are over there, you're having a great chat, and then some idiot comes over and picks a fight, blah blah blah. And that's sort of the rough and tumble of it. Obviously, sometimes it gets out of hand, and if only there were actual police that would come in, which they would do in an actual pub, or at least the bartender would say, no more for that guy or girl. But what is Elon up to? Because it's really hard. I mean, he's obviously I think he genuinely likes it. I think he enjoys using it. He's got into trouble with it. So there's the idea that he's doing this to manipulate his company share prices again, or just do something nefarious. I don't know. I sometimes think that Elon Musk doesn't really know how much power he actually has, and that sounds strange for someone with such a large ego. But he kind of seems to direct it in the wrong direction. So I'm not sure, but I take him on face value that I think he likes it. He can do something with it, and I think it is a vote of confidence in the medium. What do you think, Gerald? Am I being too kind?
I'll make a small prediction. Nobody will remember or care about this in 6 weeks' time.
Okay.
That sounds fair.
I disagree. I'll take the other side just to be.
Well, we can have this argument. We've already had terrible arguments here about chips versus French fries. We could just add it to the list.
But I think what's interesting, I thought about this morning, because Zuckerberg is trying to build this metaverse. He's spending $10 billion, right? Yep. And Elon Musk, I think he dropped like $3 billion into the Twitter investment. It could seem, I don't know, in the long term, maybe this $3 billion will be a much better investment than Zuckerberg's endless $10 billion plus 10 years to create the metaverse. I don't know. The ROI could be better. That's my analysis.
Here's another, I'm just thinking aloud about this. I've also been very interested to see that the guy that runs Binance, the crypto exchange, he calls himself, CZ, has taken, he's a very, very rich man, has taken a stake in Forbes, which I, again, felt a bit odd. He's someone at the forefront of technology with this crypto exchange. Forbes is, you couldn't get more old school journalism, could you? So what is going on with these guys that they kind of want to be involved in content? Are we maybe all missing something here?
No, you're spot on. Like Mark Benioff, he bought Time Magazine. Obviously, Bezos, here in Washington, D.C., owns the Post. I mean, there's certainly value in controlling the content. I'm going to talk about Ben Franklin later. Ben Franklin was a publisher, a printer. He was also the postmaster, and he got information faster than anybody else because he was sorting the mail and got to know the news faster, which helps his publication. So there's always value in controlling information or being a part of it. Bloomberg, obviously, running his network. I don't know.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Well, I think maybe now we know why Elon is getting involved in the forefront of news and content.
Elon Musk is our Ben Franklin. That'll be my next blog post. Look for it.
I'm not moved.
Gerald seems nonplussed. All right, let's go to something really kind of depressing. Inflation. What is happening?
It's the 1970s. Oil prices, high prices. We're just waiting for glam rock, and then we've got the full set.
Well, Gerald, here we go. Gerald, let me give you the 2 Gs that the Democrats are talking about here as they go into the elections in the fall. They're worried about groceries, gas. Let's add the third one, glam rock, right? The 3 Gs, then we know we're back to the 70s.
It's normally guns and God, isn't it? But I think it is like the 70s and it isn't, would be my view. I think Helen will probably have a more nuanced view. The sort of tabloid snapshot, it does kind of feel a bit like that era, though I think there are a large number of differences. And what I think is going to be interesting is to see whether the the labour market can impose higher prices. In other words, people get pay rises and pay rises that will stick. I rather am doubtful about that. I wonder if some of the really big engines of deflation start to come back. And I think always the technology. Technology is pressing down on prices all the time. And that's very, very different from the 1970s. It's going to be a rough year, and the way the central banks are managing it, they're certainly not making it easier. But for all the parallels, I think they're false to look at the 1970s.
So
Blonde money. What do you say?
I said, can I swear on this radio show?
You can do whatever you want. Yeah, sure.
Well, I couldn't put it out as a note, but I was going to put FUCK inflation. I think I wrote forget inflation because I didn't want it to get caught in anyone's spam filter. But like 2 years ago, I was like, just shut up about inflation, because to me, we were going to go from a disinflationary couple of decades into one where inflation would be more like 2 to 4%, right?
Yeah.
Fine, it's higher. It's probably a good thing. We spent 20 odd years panicking about it being too low. But the war has changed it all because the West has declared economic war on Russia, and that's not stopping whatever happens in Ukraine, right? So the fact they're a commodity supplier, it's to such a large degree, just means the price of commodities is going to go up. And then we have all the other supply chain stuff that was already happening, etc., etc. Now, for me, it's a stagflation story. I think Gerald was slightly headed in that direction by talking about could Labour respond by actually demanding higher wages? And I don't believe they can, because globalisation is still alive and well. The consumer is still adjusting post-pandemic to new spending habits. I have this big theory about the impairment in the velocity of people, which just means we're not doing things physically so much, we're doing them more virtually. So the way that we live and work is very different. So there is a disinflationary impact of change the way we're working, but it's more going to weigh on growth at the same time as commodity prices are going up and staying up. So I sort of see it as stagflation, and it's not very cheery, really. But I mean, are we going to? I honestly, in the Western world, I don't think we're going to 20% inflation. I just don't think that. But I think where I was in the 2 to 4% inflation range for the next few years, I'm probably picking that up to 4 to 6% for the next couple of years before it settles back down. And that is going to be a headache, and that's going to be painful for people.
So I was at a dinner last week down in Austin with 12 other small business solo entrepreneurs, founder types, and the ones that have employees are all worried about what you're talking about, keeping their staff and showering them with bonuses. And maybe this is all driven by the press and just figuring out, this great resignation idea, and also just the lack of pricing power, obviously, as a small business. But maybe both of you are saying, with technology, we shouldn't be so worried about inflation. Inflation happens. It's not going to be a runaway. And this idea, the velocity of money, I find like an interesting theory, but you're talking about the velocity of people. So are you suggesting that employees are more useful now because they can be maximized because of virtual technology? Is that what your theory talks about?
So the theory really is at its core that the number of people we interact with physically has shrunk. It shrunk because of the pandemic and social distancing and adjusting to a virtual working life. Not all jobs, obviously, but it was already shrinking because of the technological revolution that we are in. We were already doing some video calls and that kind of thing, right? Now, it's a really interesting question about labour supply, because on the one hand, I could hire anyone anywhere to work with me. And I have done. I have been talking. I talked to people in Australia. I've talked to people in America. It doesn't matter, right? Just we were in finance. We can do it all virtually, and in some respects, it's quite useful. So, but not all jobs can be done like that. And then so there's. I think we're going to end up with a kind of hierarchical economy where there's a professional class that can sell their skills globally. But then, unfortunately, a group of people at the bottom who are stuck doing manual labour or physical jobs, who cannot reskill, are stuck in their geography, and that is going to be very, very difficult for them. So And that, of course, leads to huge political issues. I should say very quickly, Mark, that America, because you have such an incredible, flexible labour market, you're going to adjust to this better. You know, you're already seeing people move. What was I reading about, like Bozeman, Montana? Is it? Like,
yeah.
They've
one of the
gone
fastest
to like
growing cities.
4
Yeah.
flights a day because people have moved. People want the big open skies and a much nicer quality of life. So, which is great. So America's already like making that adjustment. But of course, in Britain, it's, you know, quite well. Gerald will tell you how hard it is to get down to Cornwall, where is a little bit more blue sky and seaside. But if you want to move down to Cornwall, then you're going to need a lot of money for the house, you know. And of course, in Europe, it's the same situation as well. It's not that easy to move between countries. Sorry, that was
so
a very
what I'm
long...
hearing from neither one of you is, so there's going to be a bit of pain, but not as much pain as the news report suggests. And
I think there'll be enough pain for it to hurt, if you like, and it will hurt in financial markets and the bond market. But I don't think we've got a 10 or 15-year campaign. That may be a terrible hostage to fortune, but we pretty much had an inflation from 73 to late 80s in a lot of G7 countries. I don't think it's the same this time, hopefully. Another cheerful note.
Collective wage bargaining. I mean, in the 1970s, I think it's statistically, you know, that the unionisation and collective wage bargaining used to cover something like 30% of jobs. It's less than 15% now.
Yeah.
So, you know, globalisation, the atomization of labour that had been in place for a while, that's not going anywhere. So I think the sort of wage price spiral element to this isn't there.
What's interesting, getting back to information or disinformation or what's being reported. I mean, obviously we have an election here in the fall, and you know, the inflation number or the price of gas or groceries or milk. I mean, these are like standard political stories that get tons of attention that maybe are, I don't know, getting much more bigger in the sense like there's more doom, but maybe it's not as you suggest, maybe it's an 18-month, 24-month situation, but not a decade situation. So that's positive.
But
that's positive.
Yeah, it is. It's obviously a terrible time to be having a midterm election.
Well, that's true. Joe Biden is less than pleased to be having an election. All right.
I think it's if it's all setting itself up for Trump 2024, that's all I'm going to say.
Well, no, we're going to see Sarah Palin 2024.
Oh, okay.
Anyways.
Well, we've already had this scoop a couple of episodes ago, and I poo-pooed it. And look, now she's suddenly back in the headlines. So, Lord knows. I think we better move on, Mark.
I may, as an aside, I may just help Sarah Palin just to get her into the Congress will be such a joy. So I may actually spend some time in Alaska to help her out. Anyways, we're going to wrap up with our favorite segment, at least our favorite segment, what we're reading and watching. Helen, usually the guest goes first, but if you want to pass or play,
well,
we can come back to you.
What do you mean by reading and watching?
Well,
are we talking like, do I have to say something very worthy and, you know?
No, of course not. Hopefully it is below. Yeah, hopefully it's low class. That's what we're looking for.
Oh gosh,
nothing fancy. No, but we'll let Gerald go first, and then you can.
Yeah. I'll get mine out of the way. It's the Masters Golf. I don't know much about golf, but I think it's a fantastic course. It always looks a fascinating place to play, although Marc, I believe, didn't play there or really had the opportunity once. And of course, Tiger Woods, will he tee off sort of almost at the time of his transmission? And will he make the cut after 2 rounds? And will he go on to even greater things? So there's lots of stories there. In terms of what I'm watching, I rewatched a black comedy satire called The Death of Stalin, which came out about 4 or 5 years ago. It's sort of funny, but it's also quite a chilling satire. And you know, we've been talking about drawing parallels. Boy, I wonder if the Kremlin is anything now like it was in 1953. So I would recommend people to watch it. It's a little sort of catch up on 1950s history, but it's got a comic edge, but it's pretty dark. To lighten the mood, my chosen book this week is this one. It's from 2004. It's called How Mumbo Jumbo Conquered the World. And it's got the inside story about Deepak Chopra, God help us, Nancy Reagan's astrologer, and all sorts of mumbo jumbo. Now, this is written, what now, 17, 18 years ago. I hope Francis Wheen will do a follow-up, because what was mad then is now mad squared. And it's basically a hilarious book of all the nonsense we are fed and increasingly believe. Recommended.
Fantastic. What do you? I don't know. I was going to try to make a joke. Death of Stalin is actually fantastic. I think I got to suspect that there's nothing changed in the Kremlin. That there's some goofy stuff happening there now, as we speak. But Death of Stalin is a. I think it's good. I think it's funny. It's more of a documentary for me than a comedy.
Yeah, it has been genuinely recommended to me via several good people on Twitter that I should watch it as a primer to what is going on now. So, and I would happily watch it. It's got great actors in it. So I am watching a silly, funny, like I have to watch some stupid things on Netflix to just clear my head, because we spend all day looking at this economic, financial stuff. So I've watched this silly program in the US called Superstore, which is literally about some people working in a shop. I don't know if you've watched it, Mark. If you've ever seen it.
I'm familiar with it. Yeah, I love it. I love a good Superstore. So
the main woman in it is from America Ferrera, who was in Ugly Betty. She's a very good actress. But what's interesting about it, it's like 6 seasons. It's one of these 20-minute episodes. Something ridiculous happens. They're all farcical caricature characters, and of course you come to love them and care about them. But what's been quite interesting is over the last couple of the most recent seasons, they started to introduce, some serious topics. I mean, talk about unionization. I literally, the last episode was, the shop floor workers were going in to demand, better rights. And there was stuff about, she goes on maternity leave, but because she was suspended for 6 months, she has to come in on day 2 of having had a baby. And it's all hilarious because she has to express milk in the, in the break room or whatever. And it's funny, but of course it is also, it makes me think, God, working in America is tough. It's tough. And all the people, there's always the episode about health insurance, right? There's the people who are like, yeah, no, we don't have health insurance, but my leg's fine, as they limp along and blood is coming out the bottom of their trousers. So I actually think I would actually recommend it for being a fun, lighthearted thing, which does just slightly poke into some genuine economic questions, which makes me sound like such a nerd. But there you go. It's very funny as well.
I love a good Superstore, but Helen, you're right about the backdrop, because this week, famously, there's an Amazon warehouse in Staten Island, New York, that they passed union. They want to go union, which is the first Amazon warehouse to do so. Great backstory. Chris Smalls and his buddy basically took on Amazon, used street smarts versus book smarts, and they won. And there's some I've been writing about this because there's a lot of, you won't be surprised. Amazon employed a team of about 100 people with super fancy degrees to take on these 2 upstart, kind of grassroots agitators, and they lost. And, it's a good reminder. And working in America, it's interesting. It's definitely not like working in the Europe.
No.
But I'm going to finish up. There's 2 books I'm going to share. This is by Sophie Petter. It's about Macron revolution.
Oh, she's very good.
Yeah, I think she's the bureau chief for The Economist. This is a great book. I've taken tons of good notes. This really deals more with the last election and just speaking of grassroots, I think what Macron did, going out to the field and en marche and asking people what they wanted, I don't know, quite interesting. And then this book, The Last President of Europe, this was written by author at Brookings, another good Macron book. I don't know. More Macron books. I don't have any Johnson books, only Macron books in my house. And to finish up, I'm going to Ben Franklin. So Ken Burns is back with another 2-part, 4-hour documentary PBS-style series on Ben Franklin. And it was absolutely fantastic. It dropped this week. Got a chance to watch it. Learned tons of stuff that I didn't know about Ben Franklin. And I don't know, control the press, be a printer. Powerful.
He's a very fascinating, major figure, isn't he, of the 18th century? And I look forward to watching that at some stage.
That was really brilliant. His son was the governor general for New Jersey, and Franklin wanted to be English. He wanted to be British, and he went into some part of Whitehall called the cockpit. I don't even know if this exists anymore. Do you know about this? There's the room where one of the kings used to have cockfighting, and he went before the king, and they berated him, and he decided to become an American. He pivoted, and then he goes to Paris, and secures a bunch of cash to keep our revolution going. I don't know, endlessly fascinating, but. Also a reminder that the colonies it took 20, 30 years for independence. Like this idea of independence was noodling around for like decades. It wasn't just like an overnight thing. And it's a good reminder that things in politics can take a while to happen. But anyways, that's it. That's all we got. Thanks for joining. I want to say hi to our friends in Raya Italia. Helen, we're trying to get a contract.
We will get one. Be positive, Mark.
We're gonna manifest this. We gotta mumbo jumbo it, man. We gotta manifest it, right?
Exactly.